Okay, don't let me interrupt the fun. It seems like good conversations going on. Let me start with a couple things at the top. Secretary Blinken spoke earlier today with Qatari Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, to discuss the latest developments in ongoing negotiations to reach a ceasefire deal to the war in Gaza. The Secretary and Prime Minister discussed the remaining issues on the table and practical solutions to bridge the differences between the parties. The Secretary reiterated that the U.S. continues to see a deal as critical to bringing the hostages home and alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian people, and that we stand ready to work to ensure that the deal turns into an end to the war and lasting peace and stability for the region. And then on a scheduling note, the Secretary will now depart tomorrow for Asia instead of tonight, as we had originally planned, so he can attend the meeting between the President and Prime Minister Netanyahu tomorrow here in Washington. We have, to accommodate that, reorder the schedule a little bit. He's now going to travel to Laos first and then on to Vietnam, but otherwise the trip will follow the same schedule that we previously announced. And with that, happy to take questions. Saeed.
Could you explain when there's going to be a meeting with the Prime Minister?
Between the President and the Prime Minister?
No, we know the President and the Prime Minister is going to meet them on Thursday.
Tomorrow, yeah.
There's going to be a meeting with the Secretary of State?
The Secretary is going to attend the meeting between the President and Prime Minister.
Not
a separate meeting, no.
Okay.
He had always planned to attend that meeting, but earlier, that meeting was previously scheduled for earlier in the week. Then, as you know, the President had COVID, has changed the schedule, so now it's happening tomorrow.
All right, let me start with where you began at the very top, on, that he spoke with the Qatari Foreign Minister and so on. So there's still, the outlook, or there's still, there are signs that a bit hopeful, right? That we might have something, or a deal arrived at maybe in the next few days, because we know come next month, the Knesset is going to go on holiday. We will enter the election seasons here and so on. So give us your assessment of how the talks are going and what might be the glitches. What are the obstacles?
So first of all, I'm not going to put a timetable on it, which I know you didn't ask for, but you referred to a timetable in the premise, so I wanted to say that. I think that we remain optimistic, but at the same time realistic, which is something you've heard me say before. It is important that we have reached a framework agreement and that the two parties, Israel and Hamas, have agreed to the framework that the President outlined publicly some 6-7 weeks ago. That was a critical step and a critical thing to get agreed. But of course, that's not a full agreement. There's still a number of issues that we need to work through. And we are working through those issues. Obviously, the negotiators themselves are discussing them. The Secretary discussed a number of them today with the Prime Minister of Qatar, who of course is one of the prime mediators of the deal. And we continue to work through and try to make progress on all of those issues. We want to see a ceasefire as soon as possible because it is the best way to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people, to get the hostages home, and ultimately bring an end to this war.
Mm-hmm. So, in a couple of hours, in fact, in less than an hour, the Prime Minister will be speaking before Congress, one of the most important places on earth. Do you think that he can, your assessment, will he take such an opportunity to say, okay, I am announcing that we agree to these terms and so on, with whatever caveats he might have?
I do not know what the Prime Minister will say in his speech.
Okay. All right. So in the meantime, Matt, the UN says that 150,000 Palestinians, flee the new assault on Khan Yunis. This is, it's almost like the Twilight Zone. We see these people moving from place to place and so on. I don't, somewhat apocalyptic, as a matter of fact. So how long should this go on? Suppose we don't arrive at a deal. What is the vision beyond the deal, if there is no deal?
We don't want to see the horrific suffering that's happening in Gaza go on another single day.
Right.
We want a ceasefire now. We want it as soon as possible. We want to see one reached between the two parties. And that's why we have been pushing for that for some time, and not just pushing, but doing the hard work of negotiating. And when roadblocks and obstacles come up, trying to develop practical ways to overcome those obstacles and present solutions to the two parties to meet Israel's legitimate security needs, and also ensure that Palestinian civilians are protected and they get the food and water and care that they need. When you look at the additional evacuations that have happened over the past week or so, it's heartbreaking to think of what those families are having to go through, to see children picking up and having to move for maybe the second time, maybe the third, fourth, fifth time, and to move from one place that hasn't been safe to other places that might not be safe. The suffering is unspeakable, what people in Gaza have been through, and that is why we continue to push so hard to get a ceasefire.
Mm-hmm. I know this issue has been raised time and again on the issue of UNRWA, but the Knesset advanced legislation that would designate UNRWA as a terrorist organization. Now, UNRWA has been responsible for Palestinian refugees for a very long time, since 1950 or 49. So, do you envision like an alternative to UNRWA? How will schools be run? How will clinics be run, and so on?
Let me say a few things about this. First, UNRWA is not a terrorist organization, and we urge the Israeli government and the Knesset to halt the movement of this legislation. We have been clear about the important role that UNRWA plays in delivering humanitarian assistance and other critical assistance to Palestinians in Gaza and throughout the region, not just in Gaza. I think United States provides the majority of its funding majority of the funding for humanitarian efforts in Gaza through the UN. We expect to continue to do so. As you know, we are currently barred by statute from providing assistance through UNRWA, but that doesn't mean we don't support the work that they do, and we don't support other ways to get humanitarian assistance. So I would say, and you've heard us say this before, that the attacks that the Israeli government has leveled on UNRWA are incredibly unhelpful. They do nothing to advance the cause of getting humanitarian assistance to civilians in Gaza. So we're going to continue to support the work that UNRWA does in the region, while also recognizing the need for reform, something that you have heard UNRWA and the UN also speak to.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One last thing, if you could comment on, there's about UAE hosting a secret meeting with Israel and the U.S. for the day after. Could you?
Saeed, I think you were sitting right there when I commented on this yesterday.
Yes, I know, but I understand. But is there anything?
No, there's nothing I have that I would add, that goes further than what I said yesterday, which is, yes, there was a meeting last week that Tom Sullivan, the counselor of the State Department, attended in the UAE. We were discussing they were discussing a number of the measures that we want to have in place to implement the various provisions of a ceasefire and to set the conditions for the day after the conflict. And it's part of a number of meetings that we have held and discussions that we've held that the Secretary kicked off in January, and that the Secretary and others in the department have been leading for the past several months, primarily focused on security, governance, reconstruction, but of course, as to the particulars of what was discussed, that we will keep that private.
So
quite delicate.
Would you encourage like a UAE or an Arab peacekeeping force?
So I'm not going to get into publicly exactly the discussions that we are having with our partners about how to best establish security on the ground in Gaza. Obviously, security is critical. You've heard the Secretary speak to this a number of times. In the absence of security on the ground in Gaza, you will see the reemergence of Hamas. And so it is critical, unless you're going to have IDF occupation, which is something that we reject, something the international community rejects, and something Israel says it doesn't want to do. So it's critical to develop a security solution for Gaza. We're working with our partners in the region. We have made progress on it, but I don't want to speak to the details of that publicly.
Thank you.
Yeah.